No, they're not. I don't come down meetings,
Testing. You all hear me in the back there? Okay. Thank you all very much for coming today. This is a special day for some reasons that just we're reminded of here. I'm Jim Williams. I initially organized this. I want to give a shout out to Karen Barwick from Pell City here, who is co-host on this. But first of all, we'd like to give a big thanks and round of applause to the staff here at the Anniston Meeting Center who have made this possible. We have a real tight schedule today, and so I'm going to ask people to be as attentive to our speakers as possible. I didn't realize until I actually started getting the bios together for our speakers today, what a treasure trove we have here today. I've known most of these people for several years, but you know how it is. You sort of know people, but you really don't. And it's not until you start asking, certain things come up, that you begin to find out things about them or their backgrounds. And say, whoa, this is really special. Let me give you a quick kind of overview of what's going to happen here. We sequence the speakers in a certain way to basically trace from the way things were at and during the civil rights movement of the 1960s, the trajectory up to the present, and then looking at where are we now and where are we going at this point? How are we going to get there? And with that introduction, I want to jump to introducing our first speaker, who is Nancy Burleson. Nancy is an Anniston native, grew up here, and Nancy was a participant in the prior generation of civil rights.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, I grew up in Anniston and decided that the March in Selma was something that I needed to participate in. And unfortunately, I was there when we crossed the Pettus Bridge, and it was just chaos. This film was not even close to what I witnessed in Selma. Fortunately, my father had given me some good advice before I left home. He said, whatever you do, you're short and you're small. Stay in the middle of the crowd. You won't be able to defend yourself, but at least you'll be able to run before they get to you. And that was good advice, as it turned out. But the things that we gave so much of our lives for are right back like they were.
Amen.
We have the same kind of repression that was present when we started across that bridge. And it has to stop. It must stop if we're going to remain a united democratic republic. And that is my fondest hope, and I'm glad to see so many of you here with us today who feel that same way. I felt fairly alone in March of '65. I don't feel so alone today.
Yeah.
And I want to see all of us do what we can
Yes.
to register folks to vote, to help them understand that they have the right That's all I need to ask of you, and I thank you for your time and your coming down.
Okay.
Our next speaker is Francis Garrett. Francis and I have known each other, I guess, since 2017 at least, and we're neighbors down in Talladega County. Francis was born in the 1950s, attended segregated schools until 10th grade, and graduated from high school in 1971. She worked on a chicken farm after that. In 1980, moved to Nebraska and got into school, leading to a career in finance until 2005 when she switched to work as a caregiver.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, I was born in 1953, Pell City, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when President Kennedy was killed, I was 10. When Malcolm X was killed, I was 12. And when Dr. King was killed, I was 15. And so a lot of the activities that went on for civil rights and for people to gain their actual rights to vote, cast a vote, and to have, candidates that they agreed with.
Could you get a little closer to the mic?
I'm sorry.
Or the mic closer to you? There you go.
Okay, all right. So my battle started in 1992, getting more involved in knowing about the civics of the place that I lived and getting more involved in politics. That was the year that Bill Clinton ran for president. And I used to be a poll worker, and I made sure that I showed up for every election there was and cast my vote. I never thought that there were others who didn't. I did hear lots of excuses about everything, like working for the polls. If I give them my name, then they'll be calling me, stuff like that. And we do have a lot of citizens who think that if they somehow identify who they are and, their addresses and register to vote, that it's somehow going to be a hindrance to them. So I really would like to send out the loudest yell that I can to all of our young people, all of our older people who think that my vote doesn't count, because it really does. And it doesn't count when you don't cast it. So we need participation. We need to have people that are willing to help us, move us as a country away from the status quo and on into the future of this country. We've got people that have been in office since some of us were born, and they're still there if they haven't already passed away. So we need to encourage them to move on, retire, have a life outside of politics, so that we can have some of their younger generation to come in and help us to continue to move our country to where it needs to be, and so that everyone can cast their votes. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter the area that you live in. It's still your right, and no one has the right to deny that of you, even though it does say that in the Constitution, that neither the United States nor any specific state can deny a person who is 18 years of age or older from casting their vote. So I think that kind of went along with age discrimination. But it still was an issue that they dealt with, and we are still dealing with that, with gerrymandering in this country. I think that's about enough for now. But I thank you for being here, and I thank you for listening to me.
Our next speaker is Dr. Mary Harrington of Anniston here. Mary was one of 5 children raised by a textile mill worker mother. Some others here can relate to that. She was a high school classmate of Francis Garrett. I discovered when I was doing research. She graduated from Alabama State, Jacksonville State, and got her doctorate in educational leadership from the University of Alabama. She was a classroom teacher for 20 years and an administrator for 19. She was the first minority teacher in Claiborne County and the first woman superintendent there. And she's now active in education here.
I want to say good afternoon. I want to ditto everything that I have heard. I was excited when he was talking about Francis. I told him I graduated with Francis Garrett. She's giving you a little preview. I knew when we were just suddenly sent to Pale City High from St. Clair County Training School that I had to continue the dreams that I had set for myself since I was in the 7th grade. And that was to go to Alabama State University and to be a teacher. Had I graduated from St. Clair County Training School, I probably would have went on a scholarship. None of that happened because we didn't get there in the 9th grade. And we were at a place we could do nothing. We couldn't participate. The only people that could participate were the athletes. Now, with my message, I want to talk about why we need to vote in all elections. You know, people like to say, I'm presidential, and I only come out for presidential. Voting is an advancement of democracy in a civilized world. O'Neill once said, all politics are local. You know, when I heard that and I thought about it, I understood why. That simply means, through voting, a lot of things are decided. Things like the standard of lead or other flaws, whether it's PCB or whatever contaminants will be in your water. When and if your garbage will be picked up and how much you'll pay for it. What policies will be passed affecting your child or your grandchildren's schooling. What DAs will be in place to have the authority to bring issues to trial. What judges will hear and pass the sentence on the violators. It also tells us where and when, if there'll be a traffic light, a traffic stop sign, if roads are fixed, and if so, what area, if potholes will continue tearing up your car, what type budgets will be passed at the local, state, and national level, how much boards, education, cities, or whatever will receive. Your vote is your voice. And in order to have a good representative voice, you need to educate yourself. We talk about the youngsters, but we don't know a lot about what we need to know. The youngsters are the way they are because of us. We were so busy not wanting them to have it like we had. And now when we look back at it, it wasn't all that bad. It was a must to me to vote. That's all I can think about. I can remember being in Miss Mary Kennedy's room when when President Kennedy was killed. And, you know, it was passionate. She almost had a heart attack. They told us every day how important it was, what we needed to do. We've gotten to a place that people don't tell you what you need to do and what's right. And the reason they don't tell you is because they don't want you to know. Because if you don't vote, that means I can ease through the back door and get whoever I want in. When you don't vote, you make yourself count as nothing. No vote, no voice.
That's right.
When you don't vote, you are complicit. Your silence is consent that I'm okay. And unfortunately, we think long as me, my, us, four are okay, it's all right. But if they get to Bradford today, they get Kirkpatrick, they get Bohan, they get Gilbert, it's just a matter of time before they are after me. Nobody thought when Selma was going on and all of that came about that we, this generation, would be at the shape we're in. And we are made to feel like we are stupid, we're anti-Christ, simply because we want our vote to count. We believe that we the people have the right to. It's your voice. Failure to vote is non-action. You can already tell this is something I could do forever. I would do it for nothing. Because I remember when we had signs trying to help people, get people to vote, get people to do right. We are in an age where master is dead and there's no more cotton to pick. So rather than pick on each other, we need to pick a candidate.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Leonette Slay. Leonette's from Birmingham. She's a retired military intelligence officer. Leonette had a long history in politics and legislation. She worked in the Texas State House where she knew later Governor Ann Richards and Sarah Weddington, who took the Roe versus Wade case to the Supreme Court.
A long time ago.
She's a leader in voting rights organizations in Alabama and a member of the current lawsuit over Alabama redistricting.
Well, as Dr. Harrington has so passionately and eloquently explained, the vote is everything. And the vote leads to all other civic opportunities or lack thereof. So I'm going to start with some good news that comes about because of the census. There's a couple of things that happen every 10 years when the people in the United States are counted. Not citizens, not voters, but the people of the United States. One of the things that has to happen after the presidential election is that each Secretary of State has to purge the voting rolls of their state. So several organizations in the Birmingham area paid to get the voting rolls of purged voters from the Secretary of State's office. We spent much of November, December, and January calling hundreds and hundreds of telephone numbers to make sure that those voters were correctly purged. Here's the good news. Most of those numbers were disconnected, which means they were correctly purged and there wasn't any problem with that. Very occasionally we would find someone who had not voted in the requisite number and we urged them to re-register, which you can now do online. So that is a good news story. It had to happen, it happened efficiently, and we did not find any significant problems with that process. So I'll tell you another good news story is that several organizations are banding together in a collaborative way, and we are steadfastly trying to make sure that we are registering marginalized voters. This might mean unhoused voters. This might mean voters who move frequently from one precinct to another. And just as importantly, it is about registering or ascertaining the voting status of returning citizens after they have paid their debt to society. And we are making some major inroads with that. These organizations that I'm familiar with have already re-registered 100 felons who have returned from their debts to society. I will give a kudo to the state legislature for changing the moral turpitude law several years ago.
Yeah.
So at least we know what's a moral turpitude and what is not. And that has greatly enhanced the ability of voting rights organizations to quickly ascertain whether someone has lost their right to vote and has to go through the restoration process, or whether they never lost their right at all, and they are so thrilled to know that they have that badge of being a citizen when you have the right to vote.
Yes.
Okay, but not all votes are created equal, and that's why we have the courts. So I will share with you that I am a litigant in the case called Singleton et al. Versus Merrill.
Good.
Not one, not two, not three, but 4 different lawsuits pending against the 2021 legislation which established the state districts for Congress
Yes.
and for the State Board of Education.
Yes.
My suit was heard day before yesterday.
Okay.
Before a 3-judge federal panel. It was an expedited hearing because candidates have to declare their candidacy about January the 28th.
Yep.
And you can't run if you don't know what your district looks like.
That's right.
Except if you're in a statewide race. So the 3 judges were very attentive. There are 2 other cases that have been lumped with this. We expect a decision in the next week or so. And this will determine whether there is an injunction filed against the 2021 legislation because they are continuing the racial gerrymandering that occurred after the 2000 and 2010 census.
Yes.
And I don't want your eyes to glaze over when I start sharing this with you, but it's fascinating.
Yeah.
For 150 years, Alabama has determined congressional districts based on whole counties.
Right.
Okay, that is no longer the case.
That's right.
And they are splitting a number of counties,
Yes.
particularly Jefferson, Tuscaloosa, St. Clair, and others. And they're doing that to pack minority voters into the 7th congressional district.
Right.
So what Singleton versus Merrill is trying to do, let me underscore this, it's a gamble for civic improvement.
Right.
Because rather than having one definite minority-majority district, what this legislation, what our case is trying to do is to show you can keep every county in Alabama whole. You don't split yourself from your neighbor. You can stay within the deviation of population, and you can get 2 opportunity districts for minority voters.
Exactly.
You can get the 6th and the 7th district.
Right.
This is not partisan. Let me underscore that. Because it's not about the outcome of guaranteeing you get such and such or so and so. It's the process that you give more voters an opportunity to choose the candidate of their choice.
Right.
And they took 64.6% of all the minority voters out of Jefferson County and put them in 7th district.
Yep.
So the 6th district has no possibility for many of those voters. And there are crossover voters who believe just as strongly that racial gerrymandering is wrong.
Where's the 6th district?
6th district is Gary Palmer's district.
Okay.
So it's a lot of Hoover and Mountain Brook and Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
And it's about 80-20 right now.
Okay.
So it's going to be very interesting because if you've read the suit, and I've read it several times, it is so straightforward, it is so practical, that why would you not want to try to keep your counties whole? This is how you decide your taxes. This is how you decide who pays, sales tax. In Alabama, it's about maybe it's your town first, but it's definitely what county are you from. And this legislature listened to public hearings, and they didn't take any of the input. So I ask you to stay tuned to what's going to happen there.
Right.
There are 3 more cases pending, and the brilliance of the people who wrote the Constitution is that we have 3 branches of government.
Right.
And so when the legislature doesn't hold up its end of the bargain, you have the judiciary that you can go to for some relief, and you have to prove your case. And I will say that this 3-judge panel watched those proceedings in Atlanta, very attentive, asked some good questions. So let us hold good thoughts about what might happen in the coming weeks, because that's going to determine how Congress is apportioned for the state of Alabama. And I cannot, again, underscore, the vote leads to everything else.
That's right.
So if you can get yourself educated and then vote, and then make sure that you have the access that every other citizen has, then we are truly a democratic republic.
Right.
Thank you.
Can I just question?
Question to her. I came up here particularly, I think, for you. You're a litigant with Smithman, right?
Right.
And Singleton.
Yeah,
My name is Ralph Bradbury. This right here is a district of African Americans in Calhoun and Talladega County. I met with the state reapportionment committee about 3 weeks ago, and we was able to draw out this district. We're working on a congressional district. Didn't get a chance to finish it. But up here, Northeast Alabama, African Americans are not even on the school board.
That's right.
Especially African Americans. Everything that happens to African Americans is basically in the South politically. Up in here, there's enough African Americans for a congressional district and a state senate district. We know that they're stacking, packing, and cracking.
Yep.
Am I right?
Yes, sir.
But they did to us here in Calhoun County and Talladega County, they cracked us. That means packing is when they take, like I'll use Congressional District 7, Solar District. They took all of South Alabama where African Americans live, let's see, Marengo County, Lawrence County, where all of the blacks live, and stuck us into her district.
Yeah.
Period. Now, they also drew a line up to Birmingham to kick north.
there's a finger
Yeah.
that goes all the way up through
Yeah, I saw it.
Tuscaloosa and Birmingham and takes out Bessemer, and it takes out Fairfield, and it takes out West Tuscaloosa,
Yes.
which are minority heavy. So that, that finger has some other symbolic.
Yes.
I came here to get in touch with you because our group, we're on a bipartisan group. We have a bipartisan citizen group. Now this map.
Ralph, excuse me, we're going to have to move on here. Connect with Lynn after the meeting, okay?
After the meeting?
Yes.
Okay, that'd be good.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
There's my cousin sitting over there, Lucille. Our sister.
Our last speaker is Karen Barwick from Pell City. Karen is co-host of this. Karen and I go back in 2017 and so forth. Karen is a self-described political junkie. Her background, though, is she had a career as a toxic tort litigation specialist. That's a mouthful for insurance companies. what that translates to is explained to me, Karen traveled around the country testifying in lawsuits, particularly against corporations, damages for environmental pollution and that kind of thing. She saw firsthand how corporations avoid responsibility for damage they cause. Here's back in 2017, Karen started an indivisible chapter in this area, and she has closely followed federal legislation. So that's what she's going to talk about here.
Hello, everybody, and
Hey.
thanks for being here.
All right, yeah,
Aren't we
yeah.
proud? Oh, my. You've just been handed a sheet that I took from some other material about new bills and legislative changes to avoid democratic subversion. These are federal pieces of legislation that are out there and we hope will be passed. The first one is the Freedom to Vote Act. It's the most significant voting rights and anti-corruption bill in generations. The interesting part is it was spearheaded in part by Senator Joe Manchin. Normally we can't, we're not sure what to think about him, but this is a good thing. And this litigation previously, it really sort of replaced the For the People Act. Now, this sheet is going to tell you where you can get additional information about this piece of legislation, which is probably the most important thing right now, the Freedom to Vote Act. It also gives you the status, which is that it's still awaiting a second vote in the Senate, and then it goes on to the House. The For the People Act started in the House and was intended to go to the Senate. So that's the status of this one. I encourage you to get more information about it, what all is in it. It's a very worthy bill, and we really, I think, want to see that passed. I'm going to skip down to the third one, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It restores and strengthens our freedom to vote by making sure that any changes to voting rules that could discriminate against voters based on our race or background are federally reviewed. This, I believe, is intended to replace the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. We need that desperately. That did a lot of good things, and we need something that serious or more. So that's, and again, we give you a resource for more information on it. On November the 3rd, the Senate Republicans voted to block debate on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and prevent the bill from receiving a floor vote. Now Joe Manchin and Lisa Murkowski are co-sponsors. A majority of the Senate now supports it, and once it is passed, hopefully, it will then go to the House. I don't know, it passed the House in August of 2021, so keep your fingers crossed. Then I'll jump back up to the Protecting Our Democracy Act. That's a historic pro-democracy for all package that will create and strengthen guardrails to prevent the abuse of presidential power and restore fundamental checks and balances in our government. I'm going to have to say that I really, until I saw this information, that I was not familiar with that, but it really does a lot of important things like limiting the president's pardon power, extending the deadline for prosecuting former presidents and vice presidents for crimes committed, that sort of thing. Yeah. So anyway, it passed the House on December the 9th of 21 on a bipartisan vote of 220 to 280. It's a waiting Senate vote. So now I will skip down to number 4, which is DC statehood. Provides equal voice to the residents of Washington, D.C. and ends more than 200 years of taxation without representation and race discrimination. The status of it is that in April of 21, for the second time in history, the House passed legislation, again a party line vote, to make the District of Columbia the nation's 51st state. It's now awaiting Senate vote. Then, even more recent, you might or might not have read about this, there's a push to rewrite the Electoral Count Act of 1887, enacted more than a century ago in the wake of another bitterly disputed presidential election, has taken on new urgency in recent weeks as more details have emerged about the extent of Mr. Trump's plot to exploit its provisions to cling to power. It's been described as almost unintelligible, severely flawed, and that the ambiguity of the statute puts democracy itself at risk. So that one you'll probably hear more about in the coming weeks, months, years, but it's a needed piece of litigation. Please find out who your representatives are, who your senators are, whichever is appropriate, to call them about these bills and urge them whatever way it is that you want them to vote.
Every time I call Shelby's office, they say thank you, but they don't do anything.
No, they don't.
Well,
In Tuberville, you keep calling his office, doesn't say thank you.
Hey Karen, quick question.
sure.
Do any of these that look so good to us, do any of these require 60 votes in the Senate to pass? Or are they really on track like it looks like they might?
No, my understanding, I believe I'm correct, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis, they'll have to, I believe they will have to do it by,
They have to break the filibuster.
carve out.
Yeah,
Carve out and
60 votes,
filibuster. I believe I'm correct on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, the filibuster.
Yeah, and there's not 60 votes for any of them that I'm,
No Republicans for anything. Not for now.
well, Lisa Murkowski on one.
Well, maybe.
And that's about it, so.
So none of these are home free, right?
No, they're not, We really need to push the Freedom to Vote Act now, as well as the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act.
Right,
The others, have a little more time to mature.
right.
So, there you go. Please keep these, look at them, look up more information if you want it, and contact your legislators. It is senseless or pointless as it might seem. That's what we have.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This is something almost in the category of a miracle. When I started putting together this, we had speakers, and when I started putting this thing together, as far as the sequence and timeline, last night or the night before last, I thought, there is no way this is going to work. We have managed to defy gravity. I would like to take a moment, which I had in here, but omitted after the video of the attack on the Capitol last year. A couple of people had talked to me. I have a PhD in history. My background, besides being Navy, was in American history, and a lot of it was political history. People have asked, where does that attack on the Capitol rank in terms of other major national events? And giving it very serious thought, giving it very serious thought, I've said the only thing that really ranks next to it is the Civil War. This is an actual attempt to reorganize our nation.
Yep.
And to that extent, and I've told people, my last stint with the Navy was being the historian for the 4th Star Admiral who ran the stood up and ran the peacekeeping operations in Bosnia in 1996, 95-96. And part of my job there was to understand how the conditions had developed that led to the need for a peacekeeping force.
Could you speak up a little bit more?
Okay. And the most disturbing thing to me that came out of that was that I realized that what people heard from the news about ancient ethnic and religious rivalries and so forth. That was why it had just been waiting to happen again. Wasn't the cause. The cause was that there were people and groups in Yugoslavia that had personal interests in getting hold of or hanging on to power for selfish interests. And what they did was they set about very systematically creating ways of dividing people and getting people to think that the other person was the problem. To the point that, and in Bosnia it was particularly unhappy because Bosnia had actually become a truly integrated society. Serbs and Croats, Muslims had intermarried. Catholics were married to Muslims, Muslims to Serbs, Serbs to Catholics. And so in order to do what these groups and leaders wanted to do, they had to literally tear the society apart, down at the nuclear family level. And there are all sorts of horror stories. And one of the other things that was particularly disturbing to me, I grew up around guns. I grew up shooting my whole life. There's nothing, even before I got to the military, there's nothing special about guns to me. But one of the things that I learned was that the national strategy of Yugoslavia, because it couldn't stand up against the Soviet Union if the Soviets decided to roll through, was basically to have every person have his own AK-47, his own cache of grenades, anti-tank mines and whatnot. So that if something happened, then all of these people could suddenly retreat to the hills and they could wage guerrilla warfare. Guess what? With all of that hardware available, when people started to turn against each other, guess what happened? They turned those weapons on each other. A lot of the mayhem that was committed there was not committed by the armies themselves. It was committed by paramilitary groups and gangs that were armed to the teeth, that went around and knocked on their neighbors' doors and said, you Serb husband, you got a Muslim wife. You got to get rid of your wife and your kids. We're going to kill you. And we're taking you to become part of our gang. Vice versa. I went through apartment complexes where maybe a room this big, where the front line of combat ran through the room. Neighbors shooting at neighbors, killing neighbors. I went through places that I saw damage that the only thing I had seen the equal of it was pictures of World War II, Berlin after the bombing, in the bombing. I have lived since 1996 with an awareness that it could happen here. And so that's why I felt compelled to take action to try to pull this together. I claim no credit for it whatsoever, but it's something that we have to do. We have to engage because it's in our own selfish interest, in the interest of all people. This is not a partisan issue at all. It's about us as people and as a nation. I'd like to ask everybody to just bow your heads and however you feel. Let's have a moment of silence here to recognize those who lost their lives in the insurrection a year ago. Thank you. We have actually reached the end of the scheduled program. I would like to ask people if they're, we'll take a look outside. if the weather is not like it was when I came in here, I would like to have as many people as care to go down to the Federal Courthouse down there, and we'll have just a little vigil down there. We'll light flashlights, whatever you have, your cell phone, candle app, whatever. Would like to we'll take our signs along, so get some photos, and likewise, I would like to ask people. I'll tell you what. Let's do this even before we head out. If you're agreeable. I'm not a songster. I looked at they had a lot of chants and songs and whatnot for these events. I looked at that. Yeah, I don't think so. Let's find somebody else to lead it. But I would like to ask us all to join in. Hey, Court, let me pass these out.
Jim, did you happen to hear the president this morning?
I did not.
No, I did. It was It was a great speech.
It was a good speech.
Yes. But Fox has already ripping it apart.
What I'd like to do, if people are agreeable, I'd like us to sing just a couple of verses, first couple of verses of "We Shall Overcome." And the reason I settled on this is, as a couple of our speakers have noted, in many ways I see us back at 1960. We are retreading the footsteps of the civil rights marchers of the 1960s. What I'd like to do is do that here in case the weather is bad. But to me, this song is really the hymn, if you will, the anthem of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And to that, and although this is older than some of the people, by a good bit, older than some of the people that are in the room here, by the same token, I think it is probably a very, very fitting anthem for this event and for this movement, this effort that we're embarked on. So if there's anybody who has a better voice out there, I'd like to come forward. Otherwise, what I'll ask is, let me borrow one of those.
Oh, you don't have one? Come now.
Okay.
That's good. Go ahead, you the leader. Go ahead.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and take a look outside. If you did bring a sign with you, please grab a sign. Let's go down to the courthouse steps down there if it's not raining. And otherwise, we'll just sort of...
Let's hear it for Jim.
again, a huge thanks to our speakers. This is wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay?
We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. Great job.